For those who don't know, Joel has been around for a while. He got his PhD in like 1990 from Boston University. So he's been on both coasts and he bounces around from one to the other. But I met him somewhere around 1990 when he started at RAND in Santa Monica. And he was there until 94. And then he went to Amgen in Thousand Oaks. And he was there for several years, I think about 9 years. And then he went to the East Coast again, right? He went back to Maine.
16 years at Amgen.
Oh, 16. Yeah, that's right. I can't add. 1995 to 2013 is when you were there. Yeah, okay. That makes sense. That was a long time. And then you've been doing all kinds of things back in Maine. You had this company, Big Health Data, that I mentioned before people got on the call. You've done all kinds of consulting. And you've recently been adjunct. I don't know how long that will stay that way at Massachusetts College of Pharmacy and Health Sciences. And I know a lot of students are on from there. So I'm sure other people know as well that he does some other things, like he's a glass artist now. So Joel is a jack of all trades. And we're very happy for him to be speaking with us today. You know the topic, so I won't say any more and let him get into it, but it's on electronic medical records. So thank you, Joel, for joining us.
Well, thank you, Ron, for letting me at least virtually come back to California, which I miss desperately, actually. I love California. But, you know, here I am. But it's spring here in Maine, so and the daffodils are just beginning to push their way up. So my attitude's getting better, although it's still cranky because I'm an old man. So everybody, this is actually probably my last lecture I'm ever going to give, or close to it, because I'm retiring from health services research pretty much. And yeah, Ron gives me a big thumbs up. He's glad to hear it, because I've had an interesting rocky career in my life. And you can hear some of my stories actually from my class that I'm teaching right now on patient-reported outcomes and health-related quality of life at MCPHS. But today I'm going to talk about electronic health records or medical records. And I think you're going to find it pretty interesting because it's, well, these are the sources for all our outcomes research, for everything. Clinical trials. It's really the data. So I'm going to just get to it because I do have a lot of slides here, and it's probably too much, and I'm sorry. I apologize ahead of time, even though that's something you should never do when you talk. I'm going to share my screen, and I'm going to run it. So I hope you all can see it. I'm going to ask you to hold your questions. You can stick them actually if you want in the chat, and hopefully I can get to them at the end. And if not, Anis can keep them and send them to me. And if you stick your email address on them, I'll try and respond over the next week. And can everybody see my? Am I doing the whole screen or the?
See half of it. I see some. Well, I don't know. I see like half of it. Maybe it's just me.
Are you just seeing the slides?
Well, I'm seeing that to the left, but I'm seeing. Why am I seeing?
Maybe hold on a sec. Let me get it right. Share screen. Oh yeah, I didn't get the right thing. Sorry. My apologies. There we go. That would be better.
Good.
So you can see it. Okay. So let me just launch right into it. So first thing, you know, the name electronic medical record, electronic health record, electronic patient record actually has been bandied about. Of course, it used to be just the patient record and it used to be paper. But it's probably, I used to call them EMRs, and I used to try and I tried to distinguish it from an EHR, an electronic health record, because I thought an electronic health record would be something that actually had in it more than just your encounter actually with your primary care physician or with the particular provider that you happened to be at. In other words, it would be a sort of larger record. The electronic patient record is actually something that people try and refer to as something that now the patient carries around with them and actually can upload or give to their provider. And the electronic health record I was trying to refer to would be something that is larger, would include your hospitalizations and something like that. But I don't think that's catching on. And now electronic health record is really just the generic term. EMR and EHR are sort of interchangeable. And the EPR, I don't think is used very much. These are the major manufacturers, and it's just, I don't know what to call them, except they're all for profit, and they kind of mimic the US healthcare system as being for profit, and they, as you can see, it's like a jigsaw puzzle, and they don't work very well together with each other, if at all, and try and get data out of Epic systems, and it's like putting your hand into your incinerator. They are the most unfriendly of cooperators and the biggest black box I have ever seen. Cerner, of course, is number 2 in that same category in my estimation. But there you go. But not on here is Kaiser, which of course is a very big health EHR, which they spent billions of dollars on and is fairly good, but again, they don't share, don't make publicly available. So there you go. I'm going to give you, just consider this what it is this is Joel's guide to various things, and you can refer to it. The slides are going to be all yours because there's a lot of resources. I just wanted you to realize is that names have changed, and basically the consulting industry has created basically a lot of spin around all this stuff. And that's what you have to be very careful about. The other people who've created sort of definitions about what things are is the FDA. And that's actually what's kind of been happening, is everything is kind of been moved to what the FDA wants in terms of standards. And we're going to talk some more about that as well. Notice number, what is it, 3 there? It says clean, old word or phrase, clean or cleaning data. Now the new word is curation. We curate our data now. I think it's kind of cute. We're now museum curators, but I think it's kind of ridiculous as well. But there you go. All right. I'm skipping over that slide. All right, so I'm going to tell you what is needed, what is available, how to do certain stuff. Then I'm going to tell you, if we get to it, about what I believe is the ideal situation, which of course we will never see. But you know, like the National Health Service. Oh yeah, well, you know, if I believed in God, I would pray to him to, you know, deliver us from the for-profit healthcare system and everybody jostling. But of course, that's not going to happen. But so we have to live within the system that we have, and we have to make do. So we'll just go on. But as health services researchers or outcomes researchers, if you want to, like I said, if you want to move on, we're outcomes researchers now. What is the ideal database? Well, it has to have inpatient and outpatient care. You need that. It should have all the healthcare encounters with a detailed coding of all their diagnoses, because goodness forgive us if we have to actually code everything. Oh my gosh, and all the procedures. Clinical notes would be really great. Laboratory results are probably a must-have. If you're getting fancy, you need the laboratory actually, and the FDA sometimes needs that now. But if you're doing a clinical trial, you usually use a central lab because you can't trust all these different labs. And if you're really getting fancy, you need the test equipment. And if you are really getting fancy and you need the medium that it's in and stuff like that. I mean, I worked on some clinical trials where you needed all that. Images, depending on what you're doing. Now it's de rigueur to have, you know, genomic information, and how deep and how far it goes, and that is also interesting. I put / pathology because, of course, it can get very different. What kind of prescribed and OTC drugs the person is taking over time, been exposed to, whether or not they've actually been taking it, self-report maybe, or mental health care. Sometimes that's struck out of various databases because of privacy issues. If we're looking for interesting things, alternative therapies, medical devices and implants, patient self-report of health status and quality of life, vitals at frequent time points, death causes and date, social status, education, geospatial, clinical demographics of patients and providers. And then, of course, you will want that all over the lifetime of the patients. And if you're talking about kids, of course, you need like exposure to lead paint and things like that. And how about the patient's also immediate family? I mean, my dissertation was originally on family choice of what kind of healthcare and where to go. And that's really a family choice. So I tried to characterize the entire family as a healthcare unit. And that was important to actually look at what kind of diagnoses and what kind of health did they have, their health status, and characterize it. And then, of course, there's nothing like wealth over time, of course, historically. The population in the database needs to be stable, at least a year. Longer would be great, particularly if you're looking at long-term stuff. You need unique identifiers to be able to link to other data sources, because of course, within your particular data source, you aren't going to have everything you need. Need regular, frequent updates if you're thinking prospectively. Reliable, verifiable, and valid. Well, we're going to get into this more, and I learned over the weekend and today, even in more detail, that the new term for quality by the FDA and kind of the people who are really doing this work now, that quality data is now reliable. That's the term. And then I believe actually there's the issue about if you're doing clinical trials and you're even potentially going to submit this to the FDA. You need to have capacity for audits. I believe in follow-up and various other things, you need patient and provider interviews. So that's an ideal database. Very few have it. If they do, they tend to be small, right? And so they're not representative. And that wasn't on this list, but that's like an assumption, right? You need them. But let's go forward about like designing your study, because that's where we all start, right? So I'm going to pretend I'm an epidemiologist, which I'm not. But for 3 years of my life, actually, even more so, I actually was an epidemiologist. I actually had a card that said I was an epidemiologist. But anyway, so what defines your cohort? What defines your exposure that you're interested in? What defines your outcome? And what defines your covariates? So those are the 4 things that you really got to think about. What variables, basically. I'm a medical sociologist. That's how I was trained. So I tend to think population. What kind of drugs and various other things am I interested in studying? What are my dependent variables? And then what are the things that I think that affect them? What other sort of intervening variables? So that's how I think about it. But of course, I'm not a true, as we say, epidemiologist. Okay. So outcomes with uncertain diagnostic criteria are the hardest. So let's start with cancer. Even at EMRs, and we're going to talk about various other databases because they're kind of all intersecting in some ways. We'll talk about claims databases in a second. But let's just talk about a patient walking into any office, and they say, I have a pain in my gut. And what happens? Well, so they come in with a complaint, a symptom, a sign or a symptom. Now, typically what happens is a MD will put in the notes something like, the patient complains about X. Now, it used to be in the good old olden times when I was first starting in the business, that would go into, quote, the back room, and there would be a coder who would look at that and put an ICD, oh gosh, I'm going to show my age, ICD 8 or 7, maybe it was a 7, code attached to that. And that would be the code for that would be the diagnosis code for the visit. And it could be anything, right? It could be dyspepsia, or an upset stomach. It could be colon cancer. You don't know what the coder had put. Could also be rule out for, in other words. So, in other words, the physician is trying to figure out, maybe they have an appendicitis, maybe they have this or that. And so what they do is, maybe they have cancer, maybe this. So they will order a bunch of tests. They'll prod their throat. They'll take their, they'll draw some blood, and then they'll ask them to come back. So there's 2 visits now. And then we have what's called an episode. So do we link those 2 time-separated events together? And you see on this little graph here, we have, quote, acute onset. So, you know, most records don't look like this. They aren't as clear like this. There are records for basically, they're time stamped and they are over time. So somebody who is coming in is going to have multiple events or multiple records. So what do? Well, you have to like combine things and you have to figure that out. Now, sometimes they do it for you, and there's databases that create things for you. But sometimes you have to do it yourself when you get a database. For example, a claim database, and usually it will be a treatment that you would say, aha, this person actually has cancer because they're getting chemotherapy, or this person will have an appendectomy or a cholecystectomy or some other surgical or procedure that clearly defines, quote, what they have. Well, okay. So you see here, for example, diagnose plus a treatment. Well, that almost happens a lot. It says here, you know, need well-considered criteria to identify these conditions. Sometimes that's done for you. Sometimes it's not. Sometimes you have to figure out yourself. Often, though, for like something like diabetes, it's more difficult. So chronic conditions like chronic lung disease or diabetes, or things that are sort of ongoing metabolic diseases or congestive heart failure and things like that, very difficult. And then what's an episode, right? There's acute exacerbations. And then you have to really sort of think about stuff like that. And how do you characterize that? So then things become much more difficult for you. And what do you consider an episode? I used to, because I worked a lot in cancer, but I also worked in end-stage renal disease. I did a lot of work there as well, sort of pre-dialysis and then dialysis. And it became very difficult sort of to characterize sort of the slide into dialysis. And what do you actually, because test results, when do you actually determine that a person belongs actually on dialysis even? So sometimes it's difficult. You have to develop these cutoff criteria. Now, I'm switching gears on you, and I'm going to talk, I'm going to go into the FDA. So 21 CFR 314.2216. So this is codified into the Code of Federal Regulations. And it's the FDA is clear statement of the objectives, your methods of analysis, and a valid comparison. And it's about randomization, blinding through protocol and assessments to ensure comparability between groups and minimizing balance. Basically, 2 studies with 1 confirmatory evidence of effectiveness. It's basically laying out what the FDA will accept as efficacy. So when they have now been trying to sort of move away from their definitions of randomized control trials into what they call real world data or real world evidence, and fit it in to their old, what's existing in these old code of regulations, which you can look up. It's really kind of fascinating what's been going on. So this has been in law since 1962. They call them adequate and well-controlled trials. And that's interpreted as two. And this is called the Clinical Effectiveness Guidance, and it's written into a guidance in 1998. So what does that mean? For tuberculosis, it's plus information from early bactericidal activity studies plus animal in vitro studies you can get away with. And you need comparative safety data at intended dose and duration. And you can have a limited use indication with a safety database, and it can be smaller. But this is what is required to get a drug on the market. So the nature of the primary endpoint has to be well-defined and reliable, and the rigor of control of the type 1 error rate. And it has to be a prospectively planned analysis, and it has to be designed with rigor. And what the FDA has done is it has gone back, and there are a whole series of regulations regarding the data that has to be within the clinical trial. And what you guys have lived through is what has been called evidence-based medicine, that has been based on actually all this FDA since 1962 randomized control trials, and the sort of basically cleaning up medicine and drugs in the US and also basically the Western world. So it was basically the removal of patent medicines. And what has happened is that the data always, RCT stands for randomized controlled trials. That's what it stands for. What that means is that the control is not only the introduction of the experimental and the blinding on each side, but it also means about how the data is collected. And what that meant is that the CRFs, which are called the clinical report forms, became the source data, and those were audited by both the drug company and the FDA, and they became like the gold of all the clinical trial. No matter that they came out of the medical record almost became irrelevant. If they existed in the medical record, it didn't matter that there might have been a different result on one page before it and a different result on another page after it. If there was one page in the medical record that had that result, that was considered fine, which was bizarre. But that's the way it worked, because that's how the auditing worked. And it's actually still that case. So the CRF became the gold standard for the quality of the data that went into the randomized control trials. Now, of course, you're kind of like, oh, really, Joel, come on. Well, of course, the people who are the principal investigators at the clinical sites, when they draw blood and they, the laboratory does the test and they look and they copy out what is the result of the particular blood, what the hemoglobin level is. Of course, it's pretty standard what it is, and in fact, because all the companies that are doing these trials, they don't trust those labs. So what do? They have the blood drawn, and they send it off to a central lab to make sure that the standards are basically uniform, because of course they can't stand the variation that would exist in all the different labs. So actually all the real variation that exists regarding both in drug administration and in laboratory tests are pretty carefully controlled, and not much else is variation by site, except for probably the interpretation of the clinicians of adverse events. And that's where you sometimes get into trouble on a clinical trial. So, but of course, it's not like that in an EMR, because in EMR, there's no controls, right? So think about what an EMR really looks like. So this is actually from an FDA guidance. And the FDA guidance is about using EHRs for what they call regulatory decision-making, which means submitting it for use in their decision-making for drug approval, or for putting a black box, i.e. drug safety issues, or all sorts of things that the FDA does, and not only drug safety, but also medical devices, and other things that they do. And they drew up this schematic. I'm being generous. I worked in a drug company for 16 years. It was quite a good drug company or biotechnology company for many years, and then it kind of lost its way. But in the early years, it was quite good because it was basically just a bunch of nerds who had, were very excited and had developed some really interesting drugs, cloned them basically. They used to call things like this cartoons. And that's what it is. It's a cartoon, because of course it doesn't really, it's, like looking at, for those of us who work with data, it's like looking at something at 60,000 feet. It really doesn't capture the complexity in any real way of any of this, neither size nor complexity. And but it's kind of useful idea to sort of get a kind of, I guess, a kind of good idea of maybe some of it, but the EHR, for example, that it has a list of all these things underneath here of what's in there, but it doesn't characterize them in any way. And one of the things, of course, is that it undercounts the kinds of things that are in EHRs. So, for example, there are, what is that, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, And so these are called data tables, right? So there's 5 on one half and 6 on another, so that's 11 data tables. In a typical EHR, there's probably about 25 to 30 data tables, because they're very complex and they require actually a lot of stuff. I actually designed a EHR. I did the data architecture for one for a rheumatology group practice. It got very, very complex very, very quickly. And I'm going to show you why. Also, this idea of medical claims over here, this one is really kind of funny, because of course it has like a line for medical claims. I started out my career actually working for Massachusetts Medicaid. Actually, no, the Department of Public Health is where I started. Maternal and child health, doing actually infant mortality and maternal and child health services. And, you know, I started out with vital records, birth and death certificates. That was actually a good introduction to complexity, because then I started in on registries. We maintained, I was in charge of transforming all the maternal and child health registries that existed into, from paper and pencil to computerized. But anyway, I digress. Very complex. But the medical claims, for example, there were, oh gosh, I think 19 different types of medical claims forms for Massachusetts Medicaid. It's kind of ugly. Anyway, all right. We're talking about EMRs, and I've got 20 minutes. Haha, and I'm not halfway through. Okay, let's go quickly through this. EMRs are primarily unstructured data. The things on the right that are kind of like in pink are mainly, those are right now structured data. Unstructured, structured means, structured data means they're, you know, numerical, or, you know, they're ordinal. You know, they may be, you know, gender, male, female. Of course, now that's even more complicated, because what if you're trans, or you don't want to be identified? Either way, it's become even more complex these days. But just say they have a particular category. Then on the other side, we used to have, and I think there still are, all these different kinds of documents that sort of just hang off the system. And my very favorite were, of course, the audio ones, the dictations, because that was great, because, and they would be attached sometimes to the pathology or the imaging. Particularly, actually, I really liked the combo, because that was really fun to play with, which was the, you would get images of people's backs and or whatever, and then you would have the pathologist, you know, doing her or his rendition of what they saw. And then the more recent stuff, of course, is there's now natural language processing. I think it's Dragon that a lot of them use, and that transforms the audio into written text, or, you know, and so you get both a text, an audio, and the, just in case, you know, things are, and then it's signed, of course. So there's all that stuff there. You have to be very, very careful. And all that's there potentially for you. And then if you think about intake information, database, gender, there's also, you know, think of all the addresses and phone numbers and things like that. Oh boy, you know, that's a lot of fun. Okay, and it's necessary actually if you're going to do linkages, which I'm going to talk about in a sec. This is one of my favorite. I spent a long time making this thing when long time ago, but this is actually absolutely necessary for one to do, because one healthcare delivery state does not make a study. You usually need, whatever you're studying, you need many more than that. So everybody's been discovering that. Oh, gee, we need bigger numbers. And so they've been trying to combine things together. But we got patient privacy. So, and this is where I used to say, oh, we're moving from EMR to EHR because we're combining things together. We've also been lowering the sort of the water, so we can actually see more of the iceberg, or maybe it's global warming. You can actually see more of the unstructured data, and that's actually been an exciting thing that's been going on, where we've been, I think more and more of the unstructured data is becoming structured, which I think is great. That's due to things like Amazon Mechanical Turk, or actually more curation, I guess. Not as much as I thought. When I first ran across Amazon Mechanical Turk, I thought it would be used more often, but apparently it's not. It's still a lot of hands-on nurses and data techs doing this. Particularly in oncology, it really has to be done by individuals who know what they're doing, because oncology is very complex. And so people really have to go back into the EMR and look at notes, and they have to look at lab tests, and they have to look into the MRIs, and they have to look at all sorts of things. And then they can actually create structured data fields that can characterize as a first line of treatment of X, and they have a metastatic colorectal cancer in the anterior, blah, 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 blah. And that's because there are 368 different kinds of cancers, and they of course have different stages. I mean, I have a cancer staging manual, that's the size, it's about that thick. And it's just very, very difficult to really keep track of what's going on. So when I was at Amgen, I built this thing. It was called Oscar, and it was linked to healthcare claims. It was linked to death records. We tried one link into tumor registry. We linked into EMR records from other sites of care. We were like for prostate cancer, because you had to talk to urologists. I mean, it was just a real effort to try and do it all. And then we moved. It was a lot of work. We ended up, and it cost a lot of money. And Amgen now moved on. It is now probably a number of other places have done this now, and it's now proprietary. At Amgen, we just gave it away to people who wanted it, because of course it gave us a lot of goodwill. We were a drug company, because we want people to like us. They want people to spend money on our drugs. When I was there, now we don't have it anymore. And what they do now is that you either go to Flatiron, which is back up here. I'm going to show you. They're here. They call them the leading cancer-specific EHR, or you go to which one is it? Sorry. if you're interested, probably Concert AI. Both of the databases used to feed into Oscar, which was actually the brilliance of Oscar, which was basically taken from both of them. Now, of course, they don't play well with each other, so you have to, and they charge a lot of money. Now there's this company called Trinetics. It's an interesting company. And my friend Jeff Brown, who contributed some of the slides, who used to, he's still at Harvard, but he used to work at Sentinel and other places, and Harvard Pilgrim. They came up with this graphic, this cartoon. Looks kind of familiar, don't you think? It looks like my Oscar one, don't you think? De-identification matching process. Tumor registries, claims, EHR, labs, biomarkers, mortality. But on this side, they actually say what they do with it. It's kind of cool. Very interesting. But what you really need to do is understand where all this claims data that people, because this actually gives you the full picture. EMRs only give you where people are going in that particular provider set. But if you're going to really understand the full, I hate this term, the patient journey, making it sound like it's fun. It's not the patient journey. It's where people are basically going for healthcare. And if you're going to capture all of it, people used to think it's, I was talking with Ed Stepansky on Sunday morning, on Easter morning, and we were talking, it's not just for the money that we follow these people around. It's also because we really want to understand where they are going and for what reasons. And if we're going to understand effectiveness of healthcare, you actually have to follow people sort of through the healthcare system to really understand effectiveness and outcomes. That's the only really way to do it. And if you really want to get good at this, you're going to have to link up their data with, and I hate to say this, and probably, and Ed, you can unmute yourself and tell them where the real death data is. You want to tell them all, Ed? Ed?
Are you talking about obit.com?
Well, you can use Obit, but I was going to say Experian.
Okay.
So everybody, you really want to, if you don't need actually cause of death, you go to the credit card companies. They're the best ones that LexisNexis databases actually know who's alive, who's dead, and they know exactly who died. And guess what? It's because, of course, they don't want to give any credit to anybody. But if you look at this, this is a good example of what is a closed data system, what's called closed or fully adjudicated, what is called open. Yes? Well, I'm going to go on. And then what is called open again is on the green. I'm going to keep going. So there's also actually a way to get sort of larger data sets. You can also go to these, or it's not an integrated, really, they really aren't integrated, that the hospitals have bought all these medical groups. So you can actually follow people sort of through hospitals and primary care, maybe some outpatient surgery and stuff like that. So you got, Trinity Health and Henry Ford Health and MedStar, And these various places have
Yeah.
access that you can get. All right, so, all right, I'm gonna skip because I'm like approaching the end here.
Then I'm gonna punch it.
Hey,
You're punching them.
Afiva, you need to mute yourself, my dear. Thank you. All right, so I'm going to get to actually, I think the most important thing, what you're going to have to do if you get if you do get EMR data or EHR data, you need to deal with quality. This report that was put together by Duke is very good. I suggest you go get it. If you ever have to clean data, or as they say, the role of reliability now. They actually went through the various quality. When I first started this, you couldn't find these things. You had to build your own. Now they're available. You can get it through Sentinel, pCoreNet. Well, the FDA doesn't really give you very much, but now, but this data source actually is one of the best, and it's where actually the common data model comes from, for both the common data model for our claims data sets, as well as for our EMR data sets that they try and merge together. But I urge you not to do it too much, because this is the Sentinel Common Data Model, which is built basically on the backbone of claims. And this is how they do data quality. And this is the pCoreNet, and I'm not going to say very much about it because I think it's terrible. And I'm going to go directly to what I think is actually one of the best ways for all of you to use, is to use REDCap. And I believe UCLA is a member of REDCap. Ron, aren't you a member? One of the consortium? Ron? Ron?
I believe that's true.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think Carol's on, by the way. I'm not
Yeah,
sure.
I did a deep dive on REDCap. It's worth it. So if you're planning on doing your own work, this is the route you should go. It's great for no matter what statistical package you're going to use. This is great for building your own data set. And no matter where you get your data, and you can add what I think is missing, which it gives you interoperability. You could extract actually out of EHRs into your REDCap project. So it actually allows you to do pretty much out of both the structured and the unstructured data fields, pretty much. And this is the list that you can get. And one of the things that allows you to do actually that I'm going to go back here is that it allows you to add one of the most important things that Ron and I will tell you all about, is that allows you to add patient surveys. So if you're doing a prospective study where you're actually working with patients, it allows you to actually put promise measures in there and translate, and there's multiple languages, and you can actually push it out through the EMR, through this system, and collect the data. So don't do secondary data analysis. Do primary data collection. And do it through an EMR. Go work in a clinic someplace and do a small study. That's my advice. And this is another place to go to learn about stuff and pull stuff off. I'm running out of time here. Ooh, look at this. And then I stuck at the end of this a series of slides that I took from Anthony Rogers, who is a brilliant guy. I don't think he's longer the director of the Arizona Healthcare Cost Containment System. Just a really brilliant, great guy. And he put together what I think we would all like to see, which is a system where all the payers in a region have to pool their data. And it would actually create it would actually do a wonderful thing for public health. So I'm going to end right there. There's a reference set for you, and that's it. Okay. 2 minutes early. How's that, Ron?
Plenty of time for questions. So I wonder if anyone, people have their hands up. Do you see Tyler? Or at least Tyler does, I think. Or is that a hand up for a
Ooh.
question?
That was a clap right there.
Oh, okay. All right. Can you say anything, Joel, about it sounds so complicated and expensive, and to be sure that everything is, quote, reliable and so on, you know, when you've got a lot of data that you're getting out of the medical record or EMR, EHR, whatever. I mean, it just, you didn't say, you made it seem very difficult, but what's the typical process, or is it pretty all over the board for complexity and cost and so on?
So it is and it isn't. It depends upon the size of the task that you're trying to do. So if you're working with one provider, with one EHR system, it's actually not so bad. And you know, you have like 25, 30 variables that you're cleaning up. That's not so bad. And the list of quality checks are actually kind of, you know, they're range checks, height and weight. You know, you don't want anybody who's 1,000 pounds and stuff like that. You don't want anybody who's 130. You know, age, you know, range checks will clean out 99% of all your data problems right away. It's not as bad as you think.
So what about inconsistent
when you're
data?
dealing with multiple, when you're trying to import large, you know, like 5 different EMRs from 5 different places, that's when it really gets crazy. That's when you need a team. That's when you can't do it by yourself. But if it depends if you're doing a PhD. So Carlos looks like he has a question.
Yeah, thanks for that talk. I was curious about how common, or I guess prevalent, is the common data model now. I've seen it used mostly like in big delivery systems like the HMO research network. And I wonder, like for like more junior folks, like since it seems like it's like the easiest way to get EMR data, how like are a lot of health systems using that model now, or is it still limited to those big integrated systems?
I would say, well, most people know about it and most people use it. So I would say 75, 80% of people, if they want to sell their data, it has to be in a common data model. So if they want to work with anybody else, it's usually in a common data model. So yeah, whether or not it's been cleaned to be in the common data model is another question. So that's your problem usually is that they may say it's in the common data model. And then, you know, there's like, every time I look around, it's being upgraded. So, you know, it's like they're on version 11, I think now. So yeah, also that's another issue. So it is, I'd say things are getting a lot better and more standardized, but you also saw how many the smaller you go, the less likely it is, right? For people to be using it because they won't have heard of it, right? They aren't, the higher, the bigger the things. But of course, the higher you go, the more likely they're going to be grasping and looking for money. So it's a trade-off. That's, unfortunately, we live in a capitalist healthcare system, which is the sad part of it all. But, you can make it work for you though. Like, I have a PhD student who IQVIA has approached her to buy her instrument that she just developed, her quality of life instrument. How's that? So, if you have a good idea and you do the legwork, I do think people will partner with you. So you just have to put in a lot of work. And of course, Ron has to put in a lot of work too. Ron put in a lot of work on my students' stuff, right, Ron? Ron.
Sorry, I'm listening. It just takes a while to unmute. Well, yeah, but everybody's doing a lot of work on everything, so no big deal.
I know.
You did a lot of work with this.
So thank you all. I really appreciate the opportunity to blather on. Hope you all have a good spring. And if you have any questions, I do have an email address. Oh, and I see there's stuff in the chat. So Annis, you can send them along to me and